Welcome to WHRO's Weekly Edition. I'm Doug Boynton. In this week's program, Norfolk isn't the only East Coast city concerned about storms, flooding, and sinking land. WHRO's Katherine Hafner had a visit from a reporter from a Charleston newspaper. Toby Cox came to see the Army Corps of Engineers project here as they get their own underway.
Right off the bat, I wanted Charleston readers to connect. Oh, we're not the only people who are worried about these things. People are worrying about it all up and down the coast.
And once upon a time, Hampton Roads bristled with missiles. Barry Graham takes a trip in the time machine. But first, this news update from NPR. It's WHRO's Weekly Edition. The Navy finally fessed up. The carrier USS George H.W. Bush was responsible for trash that washed up on the beach in the Outer Banks last year. WHRO military reporter Steve Walsh has the story.
The trash began washing up on shore in April of 2023. The National Park Service believed at the time that the bags of garbage and other debris came from a Navy ship. The Navy is now confirming that the trash came from the Bush, which is currently in maintenance in Hampton Roads. Sailors from the carrier helped clean up the beach last year. A Navy investigation has not been able to determine who on board the ship was responsible for dumping the trash, according to a Navy spokesman. In 2017, the amphibious assault ship USS Whidbey Island was found responsible for dumping trash after disks of compacted trash washed up on the beaches in the Outer Banks. Steve Walsh, WHRO News.
Officials at Centera Health say they have significantly reduced greenhouse gas pollution from a source you might not think of. WHRO's Katherine Hafner explains.
The gas called desflurane is inhaled by patients before surgery, but only 5% ends up in the body. The rest is vented outdoors and can linger in the atmosphere for years.
The molecular stability makes it have a very large carbon footprint.
That's anesthesiologist Holly Mason with Centera. She says their hospitals have tried to phase out the greenhouse gas because of its contribution to climate change.
We have other techniques that include using more intravenous medications to maintain general anesthesia. So it really is a piece of a larger puzzle.
Centera says it's cut desflurane emissions tenfold over the past 5 years. Doctors still need to use it in a small number of circumstances. Katherine Hafner, WHRO News.
Gun violence and homicide rates are down in Newport News. WHRO's Nick McNamara tells us more.
Mayor Philip Jones and Newport News Police Chief Steve Drew reported the data at a Wednesday press conference. Compared to this time last year, homicides in Newport News fell by 55% from 20 to 9 incidents. Likewise, shootings also fell by 31% compared to this time in 2023, down from 52 to 36 incidents. The trend is being seen elsewhere on the peninsula as well. Earlier this month, Hampton reported violent crime was down 17% compared to 2023's numbers. Nick McNamara, WHRO News.
The Army Corps of Engineers is constructing a series of storm protection projects along the East Coast. Norfolk's flood wall is the furthest along, but Charleston, South Carolina, not far behind. Toby Cox is a reporter with Charleston's Post and Courier newspaper. She recently reported on how Norfolk's project could guide her city. WHRO's Katherine Hafner spoke with Cox about what she learned.
So tell me about the issues Charleston has with rising waters and what the city's floodwall plans currently look like.
A lot of the issues seem to be pretty similar. Charleston, the land is sinking, an issue called subsidence, sea levels are rising, and flooding is happening more frequently. So Charleston's project includes an 8-mile-long seawall structure that wraps around the Charleston Peninsula. It also includes things like tide gates, pumps, and nature-based features, such as oyster reefs and marsh restoration. Progress has kind of stalled, so it seems like kind of up in the air right now of where it'll go. Currently, the city is still negotiating the design agreement with the Army Corps. signing that agreement would represent a commitment to move on to the pre-construction engineering and design phase, but it seems like things are kind of up in the air right now.
What made you want to come to Norfolk, and what did your story end up looking like?
Yeah, I've just been thinking, sea level rise, strengthening storms, flooding. It's not like an isolated issue. There are lots of cities up and down the East Coast who are dealing with similar challenges and concerns. I knew Norfolk and New York City and Miami, Charleston, all dealing with it. And I think it's important to learn how other cities are dealing with this existential threat. And so I wanted to come to Norfolk to learn about Norfolk's project and how the community was reacting. And I really wanted to come to Norfolk because it seemed like it was the furthest along in the process. So the story, it starts with anecdotes from a community member in Southside, Kim Sudderth. Her community is already flooding. If it rains during high tide, they know to move their cars. She worries about future generations and kind of opens with this because these are all concerns that people in Charleston have too. Right off the bat, I wanted Charleston readers to connect. Oh, we're not the only people who are worried about these things. People are worrying about it all up and down the coast. To kind of give Charleston residents a peek into what the process might look like if the city of Charleston decides to sign the design agreement, what might the next steps look like?
What were the biggest similarities and differences between the projects in each city?
The biggest things that stood out to me were the similarities. Both cities are dealing with these threats of sinking land, rising seas, making them especially vulnerable to storms. One of the main differences I saw was the geographies of these cities are very different. Norfolk is a lot more spread out. Charleston has a distinct peninsula that an 8-mile-long wall can wrap around, whereas Norfolk's approach seems to be more segmented with the 4 shorter segments. Norfolk's project is more expensive. Also in Charleston, there are a few communities, all the communities outside of that 8-mile-long wall. They're worried, will the wall over there make our flooding worse over here? And that is a concern that I also heard in Norfolk. A lot more people in Charleston seem to be worried about the project's aesthetics. People are worried it will be ugly. I wasn't here in Norfolk very long, but I did not hear that concern as much.
What's the biggest message you think Charleston residents can take away from Norfolk and vice versa?
I think that it's important to emphasize that these issues aren't being experienced in isolation, that they really are big issues that communities are facing across the globe. And we can all learn from each other.
Virginia's 3-day sales tax holiday begins today. WHRO's Ryan Murphy fills us in.
School supplies, clothes, and shoes will be available this weekend without the 4.3% state sales tax. Shoppers can also get hurricane preparedness supplies like generators and chainsaws tax-free. Energy and water-efficient appliances and fixtures like washing machines and toilets also qualify for the exemption. The tax holiday was created in 2006 for families to save on back-to-school shopping, but the state has expanded the eligible items over time. For a detailed list of what's tax-free and what's not, you can check online with the Virginia Department of Taxation. Ryan Murphy, WHRO News.
Traffic cameras for red lights in school zones came to Hampton this week. We get the details from WHRO's Barry Graham.
The City of Hampton will implement traffic camera enforcement beginning Thursday, targeting red light violations and speeding in school zones. Cameras will monitor red lights from 3 to 6 p.m. on weekdays at Mallory Street Bridge and Settlers Landing Road. For the first 30 days, violators will receive warnings instead of citations. Starting August 26th, the program will extend to school zones with cameras targeting speeders, initially at 7 schools, and later expanding to 12. After a 30-day grace period, violators will receive $50 fines for red light violations and $100 for speeding in school zones. Barry Graham, WHRO News.
Only the third heart transplant in the U.S. between HIV-positive patients started in Hampton Roads recently. WHRO's Michelle Hankerson has the story, and we should note, this story mentions suicide.
Zach Pate meticulously managed his HIV since being diagnosed 10 years ago. It's what made him a favorable candidate to donate his heart and kidneys after his death this summer. Pate died by suicide. He spent time in the neuro ICU at Sentara Norfolk General before passing. That's when Virginia Beach's LifeNet Health stepped in.
We were thrilled with the selfless act from this gentleman and his family, and that it just all matched up and created a beautiful story.
That's Doug Wilson, Executive Vice President at LifeNet. Pate's heart and kidneys went to another HIV-positive patient outside of Virginia. He was honored at Sentara Norfolk General with an honor walk, including members of his family and care team. Michelle Hankerson, WHRO News.
Anti-violence groups in Norfolk hit the streets last weekend, hosting a walk to spotlight their efforts in support of older residents who feel unsafe in their neighborhoods. WHRO's Ryan Murphy went along.
Sam Sutton walked slow and steady along Brambleton Avenue Saturday morning.
My leg's not good, but I come out here anyway.
He was committed to finishing the whole of the Victory Over Violence 2K walk around Young Terrace, where he's lived for the last 40 years. Sutton says a series of shootings have made him feel unsafe in his neighborhood. The 2K was organized by Community First, a collaboration that puts boots on the ground in Young Terrace to stop violence before it starts. Clay Marquez is one of the men behind Community First.
This community has been plagued with a lot of violence, but there's a lot of good that's going on in this community, and we're just trying to keep progressing forward on doing positive things out here.
Community First members have spent the last 3 months doing everything from escorting seniors to their grocery shopping to monitoring school field days. Ryan Murphy, WHRO News.
If you have friends or relatives, or maybe you developed a case of COVID-19 this summer, then you know we are in the middle of the summertime bump. I spoke with Virginia Department of Health epidemiologist Elena Diskin, who says the updated vaccine will be out in September. National reports are talking about a late summer. Is it a spike? Is it a bump? And are we noticing it in Virginia?
Yeah, so COVID-19 activity is showing signs of growth nationally and in Virginia. For previous week, the week ending July 20th, 1.7% of emergency department visits were for patients diagnosed with COVID, and we've been seeing this steadily increasing since early June. And for the past few years, we have observed seasonal patterns of COVID-19. We see our major activity in the winter with a peak around New Year's. We also have these smaller late summer peaks that we saw very similarly last year in 2023.
How does this compare to the spikes we used to see during the pandemic, or is it more like a bump?
Yeah, I would definitely say that we're seeing an increase really rather than a spike. Right now, we are pretty comparable to what we saw last year in 2023, but we're nowhere near the numbers and levels that we were seeing in 2022 and 21.
For prevention, is there a new vaccine or an updated vaccine coming, or is it here now?
Yeah, there will be an updated COVID-19 vaccine this fall. We expect to see that come out probably early September.
If you are in a vulnerable group now, what can a person do to avoid coming down with the virus?
Yeah, so if you never got your updated COVID-19 vaccine last winter or fall, you might be eligible for an additional dose and or to get it for the first time. And then you could help protect yourself now and get the updated one again this fall or winter.
One of the things that again on this national report that I heard yesterday, they were talking about it's hard to get an exact handle on the number of cases because people perhaps treat themselves at home and don't show up in an emergency room or at a doctor's office, and that one of the ways that they've been watching the spread or the increase now has been through wastewater. Is VDH looking at wastewater?
Yeah, you're spot on. So our focus now when we monitor disease trends and we conduct what we call disease surveillance to track kind of what's happening in the community, we're really looking at emergency department visits. That's a really near real-time data point that helps us see changes in how many people are seeking care for serious COVID-19 infections. However, like you said, many people might have more mild illness and are able to recover at home due to, immunity from vaccines or immunity from prior infections. So they might not need to go to the emergency department to get care. So like you said, one of the great kind of public health tools that's a little bit of a newer tool that's exciting is that we can test wastewater for different pathogens to look at how much virus is spreading in the community.
Very good. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was great to talk to you.
This is WHRO's Weekly Edition. Remember, for any stories you've missed, you can visit us on the WHRO smartphone app or all social media platforms.
Pharrell Williams' Something in the Water Music Festival returns to Virginia Beach on October 12th and 13th this year. WHRO's Sienna Morales has more.
Festival organizers confirmed the dates on social media Thursday night. In the video announcement, the camera panned up on a digital rendering of the Virginia State Seal, Vertus standing half submerged over Tyranny lying on the seabed with the Virginia Beach oceanfront in the background. Comments on the posts ranged from excited to nervous about chilly beach concerts in October, but Williams has said he didn't want to have it in the spring anymore after stormy weather punctuated the festivals in 2019 and 2023. This year's festival will coincide with the U.S. release of Williams' Lego biopic, Piece by Piece, about his childhood in Virginia Beach. It will also be at the same time as several university homecomings. Sienna Morales, WHRO News.
It's Economics 101, right? Increase the supply and prices tend to go down. Well, an analysis by a local nonprofit says building more houses and apartments may not have that effect, as we hear from WHRO's Ryan Murphy.
Developers and some housing advocates argue that building more housing, regardless of type, will reduce prices. But a new analysis from Alex Fella at civic nonprofit CityWork calls that into question.
Now, if rents were just dependent on things like supply and demand, we would ideally see rent changes map much more closely on with changing housing availability, but that's not what we see at all. These things actually, when you map it out, seem to be quite random.
For instance, Hampton had the biggest drop in availability in the region between 2014 and 2022, but only had the fourth highest rent hike among the 7 cities. Fella's previous research points to possible influences on rising rents, including interest rates and corporate investment. Ryan Murphy, WHRO News.
The city of Hampton is launching a federal study on how to protect the peninsula from major storms. We get more on that from WHRO's Katherine Hafner.
Hampton will lead the effort to study flood risk across the peninsula from Poquoson to Williamsburg. Last week, City Manager Mary Bunting signed a formal agreement with the Army Corps of Engineers that jumpstarts the process.
We are very excited about today. It's been a long time coming.
The study will take $3 million and 3 years to complete. Congress approved it last year through the same program that led to Norfolk's massive floodwall project. Virginia Beach is several years into a similar study. Katherine Hafner, WHRO News.
Hampton wants to put new life into a historically black neighborhood that has seen big changes since the 1960s. The city's DEI office is working to ensure resident voices help set the direction for that neighborhood's future. We hear more from WHRO's Nick McNamara.
Gabe Diaz, director of the city's Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, says helping with the Old Hampton project is the office's first major foray into engagement work around neighborhood development.
We're just lighting the spark for the fire that's already in these communities.
Some work has already finished, like construction of the Mary W. Jackson Neighborhood Center. Remaining to be done, the reconstruction of Grant Street, set to be finished by the end of 2025, as well as potential new housing development, something highlighted in resident input. Nick McNamara, WHRO News.
Several decades ago, Nike missile sites were sprinkled around Hampton Roads. Named after the Greek goddess of victory, these Nike missiles aim to combat potential high-flying Soviet jet bombers. They are long abandoned, but WHRO's Barry Graham looked around Hampton Roads to find where they once stood.
The chance of your being hurt by an atomic bomb is slight, but since there is a chance, you must know how to protect yourself. To protect yourself, you have to know what the bomb does. We have the national defenses to intercept an enemy, and we all form a team to help each other through emergencies. You are on that team.
50 years ago, 8 missile sites sat around Hampton Roads, ready to strike should tensions with the Soviet Union boil over into an actual military confrontation. For those who grew up in the 50s and 60s, Cold War hostility and the looming threat of a military strike was a part of daily life. In 1952, schools even introduced an animated cartoon of Bert the Turtle, teaching kids to duck and cover during a nuclear attack.
Dum-dum, beetle-dum-dum, beetle-dum-dum, beetle-dum-dum. There was a turtle by the name of Bert, and Bert the Turtle was very alert. When danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do. He'd duck and cover, duck and cover.
He did what we all must learn to do. You
and you
and you
and you, duck and cover.
The Nike missile program was developed and involved over 300 sites across the U.S. In Hampton Roads, missile locations were strategically located around the region, from Fort Story to Carrollton. Albert Buckard, who gives tours at the site, said the Nike missiles were no secret. In fact, they were flaunted.
The base was not secret. The Army wanted the civilians to not be afraid of this missile base. And so periodically each year, they would do an open house. The public would be invited in all over the place. And the NCO Wives Club would provide dessert. But the whole point is, not only did they want the public to see and not be afraid, they want the Russians to know.
Ira Abbott was stationed in Carrollton in the late 50s. He says only once did they come close to launching a missile.
Radar picked up the plane that was coming in. It was a Navy plane. And before he came in, he dropped his weapons. We had a pretty gung-ho lieutenant on duty. They ran a missile up, and he was ready to fire it when the Air Force tally-hoed it.
Today, most of the Nike sites are long forgotten. One near Williamsburg is in a wooded lot. In Deep Creek, a part of the Public Safety Training Center. In Virginia Beach, a parking lot for city maintenance vehicles. In Carrollton, Nike Park sits where Underground magazines stored missiles. Jennifer England is director of the Isle of Wight County Museum. She says the land there was obtained for the base through eminent domain, and today, bad feelings still exist.
There are a few community members who were promised that their land would go back to them, and it did not, and there's still some residing bitterness because of that.
Across the country, suburbia seems to have taken over where once these missile bases sat, though the Nike reminds you of a time when you needed to be ready to duck and cover. For WHRO News, I'm Barry Graham.
Dum-dum, beetle-dum-dum, beetle-dum-dum, beetle-dum-dum. There was a turtle by the name of Bert, and Bert the Turtle was very alert. When danger threatened him, he never got.
You've been listening to WHRO's Weekly Edition. We had help today from Steve Walsh, Nick McNamara, Katherine Hafner, Ryan Murphy, Michelle Hankerson, Sienna Morales, and Barry Graham. And thanks as always to Connor Worley, who produced today's broadcast. A reminder, you can always catch full episodes on the Weekly Edition podcast feed, and you can get news updates at WHRO.org, the WHRO mobile app, and the WHRO Reports podcast feed. For all of us at WHRO and WHRV, I'm Doug Boynton. Stay safe, be well.